Hi everyone, Chris from SSW TV here, and today I'm with Stuart Corner, one of Australia's most experienced writers and commentators on telecommunication. He's also the guy who runs iotaustralia.org.au, and today we're going to talk about IoT and where the opportunities are for developers. Stuart, how's it going?
Pretty good, Chris, thanks. Yourself?
Pretty good. So do you want to start off by giving us a quick intro to IoT?
Okay, Chris. Well, IoT stands for the Internet of Things, and that's to distinguish it from the Internet today. I mean, to date, the Internet has been there primarily for human consumption. Everything that comes over the Internet really is for us to read, to watch, or to listen. Indeed, in the Internet of Things, the data is designed for consumption by computers, essentially, or for control. So there's Internet of Things means sensors in the environment, on machinery. It means things in your smart home. It means wearable devices. All these things that basically produce data which is designed to give you some information. There's also a term called the Internet of Everything, which has been comes from Cisco, which is gaining some traction. And it's really an acknowledgement that it's not just the things and the communications network, but the ecosystem embraces all the processing of that information, particularly data analytics, aka big data, because there's going to be lots of things out there. The forecasts are for billions. And these produce massive amounts of data, which only provides value when you do some analysis on it. So I think it's a useful concept to talk of the Internet of Everything, because it does make people think about the whole ecosystem, not just the things in the communications network.
Well, that's amazing. So where are we now in regards to IoT? Where's it currently being used today?
Well, it's widely used, of course, the smart home technology. Smart metering is widely used. There are, I think, several million smart meters in Victoria alone. Machine-to-machine communications is very well established. The wearables boom is again well established. But if you go to Gartner, who are famous for their hype cycle, if you recall, it starts off with a technology trigger, rises to a peak of inflated expectations, and then when those aren't met, it declines. And eventually, it reaches a plateau of productivity, which is a mature technology. Gartner says IoT is right at the peak of inflated expectations. I would tend to disagree with that. I think it's beyond that and is an established technology. And certainly in some areas like M2M, machine-to-machine, have been going for several years. But there's lots of Internet of Things applications that are in use today. It's just they're not widely known. I think the awareness of it is really beginning to spread.
So, of the range of these applications, which would you say is your favourite?
My favourite applications, it's hard to pick a favourite, but if you want something that's really quirky, there's an Australian IoT startup called Wearable Experiment, I think, and they came up a year ago with something called Thunderwear. Thunderwear is underwear that vibrates and is controlled by your partner. So you're vibrating underwear and their partner controls it. It's called the future of foreplay, I think. So,
oh, I've got to love Australians, don't you?
That's a really quirky one. That would have to be, a really bizarre one. Other than that, a favourite? No, I don't have any particular favourites. There are many, many very viable applications.
So that Thunderwear, interestingly, would you say that would also then relate to the quantified self movement?
Well, absolutely. Although I don't know how you'd quantify that, but the quantified self movement is the whole idea that you measure everything about what you do, and some of that would come from wearables, which plays a big part. Monitors your heart rate, where you go, how far you walk, how far you run, how many calories you burn. But it's also things that would need some of the technology to get it into data form, like what do you eat, which you would have to manually input in most cases, or you could scan the barcode on the product package and things like that. And the quantified self movement's been around for a few years and actually got quite a bit of momentum. In fact, if you go onto meetup.com, there are two meetup groups in Australia dedicated to the quantified self. The one in Sydney's got about 300 members, and the one in Melbourne just got shy of 200 members. And these people are really looking at the technologies to do this, and of course wearables, IoT, play a big part of that. And it has real potential. If you track what you eat and how you feel over a long period, you could well uncover allergies to certain foods that you probably didn't realize you had. You just wonder why some days you don't really feel crash hot, and it might be something you ate that day. And after a while, you'd start to see a pattern emerge.
I agree completely. I actually discovered I had a lactose allergy recently from having to keep a physical diary of what I was eating and when I was feeling unwell. It would be great if I could just wear a Fitbit or something like that, and then it sort of tell me, hey, maybe you should try and not have the dairy so much.
And of course, that's where the data analytics part of IoT comes in. You wouldn't have to manually look at all the information. You would just feed all this thing into some processing engine that would say, I think there's a link here between consuming lactose and not feeling good. You should look at that.
But I think the real question is, where does this data reside? Who then owns the data about my consumption habits, and what can they do with it outside of telling me I have allergies?
Well, that is the question. I mean, there is existing privacy legislation, but I'm not sure it covers all the applications of IoT. Any of these wearable devices, the data is essentially stored in the cloud. Fitbit's data goes into Fitbit's cloud, or the data goes into other clouds. And the rules and regulations are still being formed as to just who owns that data and what they can do with it. And probably a lot of it is specified in the terms and conditions when you sign up for these services, which of course nobody ever reads in the first place. But it is a very grey area that will need a lot of work to actually clarify over time.
So you talked a little bit earlier on about machine-to-machine applications. What kind of industries do you feel are going to really take hold of that?
I think every industry will take hold of that. There is not an industry that can't make better use of data that comes from machines to improve maintenance. If you have a sensor on something like a conveyor belt, you can know if it's going to break down. So you can replace maybe unnecessary scheduled maintenance with timely maintenance, and you can avoid breakdowns which are extremely costly. And that applies across the whole gamut of industry, anywhere where there is machinery that wears, that can have breakdowns that can be costly. But more than that, you can actually have input to the manufacturing process, and you can control what you're doing. And there's a whole movement around industry called Industry 4.0. It's called 4.0 because Industry 1.0 was the Industrial Revolution. Industry 2.0 was production line manufacturing, a la Henry Ford, and Industry 3.0 was the first stage of digitization. And in this vision, which came from the Germans about 3 years ago at CeBIT, they announced it, and is rapidly gathering momentum. Then the whole of manufacturing becomes automated. You actually have input to the manufacturing process. So you could decide, you could go to a website, for example, and say, I want this particular device, and that would feed information into the manufacturing chain. It will be produced and packaged and shipped to you completely automatically. It's a very immature area at the moment. The projections I've seen say it's going to be here by about 2025. But I heard someone say the other day that the Germans in particular are working gangbusters on progressing Industry 4.0, which wouldn't be surprising because obviously German manufacturing is in many ways world leading, but increasingly being threatened by manufacturers in low labour cost countries. So they have to find ways of maintaining an edge.
See, that would be extremely useful as a developer. Sometimes I'll order parts and sensors and they haven't been customized to my needs. So I'll come in, I'll get all sorts of conflicts and weird situations. It'd be great if I could just say, look, I want to order all these parts you're going to manufacture, but can you pre-burn in the correct IDs for me before you even send it out the door?
Yeah, but those are certainly the sort of things that will start to happen.
So it's clear that IoT is going to change our lives. What kind of issues do you kind of foresee becoming real threats for its growth?
Threats to its growth, I think possibly privacy legislation would get in the way of certain areas. I think the general sort of skepticism about new technology will slow its growth in some areas, unless there can be a level of education. You know, a lot of people say, oh, it's just another buzzword. They just see it being bandied around as another buzzword that doesn't really have much significance. But, you know, there are many leading authorities that actually say it is going to be bigger than the internet and more disruptive than the internet. There was a report produced by the World Economic Forum and Accenture this year that said things to that effect. I think, you know, government probably needs to have some involvement, and there's momentum here to get governments to recognise that it is a major trend that's going to impact all areas of society, and to, without over-regulating, do what they can to smooth the way. I don't necessarily see any huge barriers to its uptake. I think, you know, useful applications will be found. That we're an innovative country. You get people like things like Funderware and many other applications that will come up with small scale ideas for IoT. There'll be some big wins, and it will generally gather steam, I think.
See, it's really interesting because there's been a lot of talk lately about us needing to innovate for a future. And I have a feeling that is going to really be the driving force for IoT's adoption, this need to do more with less, this need to innovate. But the massive problem I foresee is security, because we can go and legislate all the privacy, but if someone can just hack into the device and download all of your personal data, it doesn't really help the price of eggs.
Well, that's the biggest problem, I think, with IoT, because the devices are generally very low cost. They have to be low cost to be widespread, and in many cases they're not very secure. Security isn't built in. There's been a few high-profile incidences where these Wi-Fi connected light bulbs that you can change the color of and turn up and down from an app on your phone have vulnerabilities that allow people to steal the password for your main Wi-Fi network. And once they can do that, they can get in, and goodness knows what else they can do. They're notoriously insecure. And there was a chap called Jeff Houston, who was a kind of very much an internet luminary in Australia, and going back to the early days of the internet, wrote a piece on his blog recently saying it was the internet of toxic and stupid things. some fairly high-profile shortcomings of some internet devices. Now, you know, lack of security has been a feature of almost every innovation of IT. If you go back to Wi-Fi, the first Wi-Fi encryption protocol, WEP, was found to be woefully inadequate, and was subsequently replaced with WPA2, which is much better. So I think security in IoT things will catch up, and ways will be found to secure things at cost effectively, either in the devices themselves or some other components in the network. But there are likely to be a few high-profile, almost certain to be some high-profile breaches where people have got into networks through IoT devices, which will create bad publicity and will probably slow things down a bit. But you can say the same for other areas, I think. You know, cloud computing, for example, was held to be a security threat. But cloud computing has gained momentum very rapidly, and those problems have largely been solved. Another example was bring your own device. I mean, corporations were forced to accommodate personal mobile devices. This created security threats, but now, first, the mobile device management technologies emerged, and now there's plenty of companies supplying enterprise mobility management, which make those sort of ecosystems to be quite secure. So, you know, where there's a demand, I think the industry will catch up quite rapidly, but it probably does cause a hiccup, and it certainly creates opportunities for people to come up with solutions.
So as a developer, I see the main problem being that there's such a wide area to secure. It ranges from the device all the way up to the web service and everything in between. And I agree with you. I hope that they take the same kind of approach we took to Wi-Fi security, which was we kept iterating, we kept trying to improve the standards, and we kept trying to come up with a better way to secure ourselves. But see, funnily enough about the light bulbs, I remember that story because we have a few of those light bulbs in the office and they didn't stay around much longer. So with everything needing to communicate over the air, what kind of networking infrastructure do you think we're going to really be seeing get fleshed out for IoT?
Well, that's a really interesting one, Chris, because it's sort of fairly accepted that cellular today is not well suited. It requires high power in the device, and a lot of these IoT devices are designed to sit there on battery power for years and just wake up when they've got something to say or to be interrogated when somebody wants information. So cellular as it is today is not well suited. The next iteration of cellular, which is being worked on very aggressively, called 5G, will specifically cater for IoT devices, but that's a few years off yet. And there are a number of other technologies emerging to connect these devices. They're generally called LPWANs, low power wide area network technologies. Wi-Fi is clearly one option, but these use what are called the instrumentation, scientific and medical bands, ISM bands in the wild spectrum, which are in Australia called class licensed, which means you don't have to have a specific license. The device you use just has to comply with the power transmission characteristics, etc. And in fact, we just emerged this week. There's a company in Australia is about to launch such a network, and the company's called National Narrowband Network Communication, which I think is a bit of a sort of take on National Broadband Network. And they're using a technology which is now standardized called LoRaWAN. It's got the backing of IBM and a few other big players, and it works in the 918 to 928 megahertz band, which is class licensed in Australia. They've got one base station in operation. And the whole idea is that this will be an open network that anybody can buy devices that conform to the standard, and then they just pay for service to get their data over that network, and then they can do with the data whatever they like. And they said it will be very low cost. They reckon the base stations that can serve hundreds of thousands of devices over a range of about 2 kilometers in urban areas and as much as 15 kilometers in rural areas will only cost about $5,000 each. So they can build this network and fairly low cost. And then the base stations are backhauled over cellular or over terrestrial links. And in fact, they're talking of partnering with NBN Co to do that. And they hope to have that network up and running in very short order. So this provides, I say, cost-effective connectivity for anybody who wants to deploy an IoT network, as long as they can get the devices. And this is an international, it's not a standard yet, but it's certainly gathering momentum. French telco is planning to put these networks in 500 towns in France within a couple of years. So that will create an ecosystem that means that there'll be a mass market, the cost of the devices will come down. But that's only one. There's numerous other similar technologies, some of which are proprietary, some of which are being standardized. There's a French company called Sigfox, which recently scored investment north of $100 million from a number of very high-profile investors. They're planning to build these networks out in 60 countries. They haven't indicated they're going to come to Australia yet. And there's another company technology called Weightless. There's one called Newell, N-U-E-L. And there are some standardizations initiatives. So how this is all going to pan out, I think, is anybody's guess at present.
So do you see eventually that we'll be able to buy a component, and let's say I'll pay Sigfox $100 a month, and I can push data over their network, and then I don't actually need to pay the $5,000 for the base station, rather I can just rent some bandwidth on it?
Yeah, you won't buy the base stations. It's just a reflection of this network coming rolled out at fairly low cost. You will simply buy your devices, and then over a standard internet connection or a leased line, you will get your data from that network. So you won't have to worry about connectivity, essentially. You put your devices wherever you want them, and then you get the data from them, as I say, just over an internet connection, which will ultimately go connect to this wireless network.
That's excellent to hear. As I've been playing with IoT a bit lately myself, and I was working on doing a remotely connected weather sensor that I would attach to a model plane to do all sorts of telemetry data. And the biggest problem was trying to actually fit on the SIM card module, because they're a large module, and they, as you said, they require a fair bit of power.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know how big these sort of modules will be at the present time. I haven't got any information on that.
So with the ability to connect these devices that are out in the field, do you see that this is going to also help the fog edge computing initiatives also?
Well, that's another interesting area. I mean, there's a school of thought that says these things are going to generate masses of data. You don't want to ship all that data back to a central hub for processing. And in some applications, that might well be true. For example, if you're sensing any piece of machinery, it's going to generate masses of data throughout normal operation, and you're only looking for anomalies like increased vibration that tells you something's wrong. You're never going to want probably most of that data. So it makes good sense to process that at the edge of the network and then just send some kind of analysis back higher up the chain if something amiss is detected. But for example, if you're trying to analyze logs from a network device looking for intrusion attempts, then you're never going to know what you're looking for. So you've really got to take all that data and process that centrally to look for the anomalies that might say someone's trying to get into the network. So I think it will have applications in some areas, but it certainly won't be universal in the IoT world. And then there's fog computing is a purely Cisco term for what can be generically called edge computing. And there are a number of different ways of doing it. And again, just how that's going to pan out, I think it's still too early to tell.
Yeah. See, that's the funny thing about the fog computing name. It's so sexy, but I know it's just a Cisco-only term. So we'll be very curious to see which name sort of takes over.
I mean, they call it fog in relation to cloud. It's a term that's kind of linked to cloud, but I'm not sure it's a very appropriate term. Edge computing is far more generic and far more descriptive of what we're actually talking about.
So this all sounds wonderful, but where do you see the developers fitting into this? What kind of opportunities are there?
Well, any ecosystem is going to require several components. For example, if you take something like a smart metering application that the CSIRO has developed and has been commercialized, you put these little devices in your home that monitor your electricity supply, and they communicate over the internet back to a central cloud, and then you have an app on your smartphone or your tablet that shows you how much power you're using and allows you to turn these devices on and off. So in any system like that, you're going to need some software in devices, you're going to need software in the cloud, and you're going to need an app on a control device. So anything you come up with that wants to do something like that is going to require quite a lot of software development. And it's really, the scope is only limited by people's imagination. I came across a really interesting app the other day at the CeBIT show, and what someone's developed, it's a SIM module that's actually embedded in an insole that goes into your shoe. And the whole purpose of this is to track dementia patients if they wander out of a nursing home, for example, as they do from time to time. And the thinking behind it is this: even a dementia patient isn't going to go walk about without putting their shoes on. So this isn't a device they're even aware exists, but it's there, and once it goes out, then it starts to send signals using the GPS that they can be tracked and recovered. And there are many more innovative applications. The scope is only limited by people's imagination. In terms of actual employment opportunities, I just did a quick search on one of the major employment sites, seek.com.au, and I put in IoT, and I got about 80 hits on Google. If I put in M2M, I got in over 30,000 hits for job opportunities related to M2M. So, and this is seek.com.au, this is the Australian website.
Yes.
So it may be a matter of just nomenclature, that a lot of jobs aren't being flagged as IoT yet, but certainly in the M2M world, there would seem to be vast scope for job opportunities.
See, I'm really glad to hear about the dementia patients' shoe tracking, because Alzheimer's is very close to my own heart, with a grandparent who was affected, and they had to put down this large mat that was very obvious and would set off this alarm whenever he'd walk on it. And the problem they told me was that they only had so many mats because they were really expensive. So this would be a great solution that would really bring down the costs.
Yeah, I don't know what the cost of these things are, but I wouldn't imagine it's huge. SIM modules are obviously widely available, and it's fairly easy to manufacture.
So do you see these little rogue shoe developing, Thunderpants developing single devs or small teams, or do you think it's going to be more of a larger corporate space?
I think if you look at the real innovation that's come through the internet, it's never come from large organizations. It's come from one or two individuals. Google, Facebook, Twitter, you name it, they started off, and obviously those are the standout ones. But I think disruption tends to come not from the established order, and many of these applications will be disruptive, and probably will gain, some of them will become huge. Established organizations will certainly deploy IoT technologies to streamline and improve their operations. But I think the really innovative applications for IoT will come from left field, from creative entrepreneurial individuals.
I agree completely. So I remember the other day we talked about the quantified self, and I went home thinking, oh, it's really interesting. And I recently actually just recorded a webinar where I made a little weather temperature sensor that sent data back to the cloud. So I'm retooling it at the moment to track my office environment to see, does my actual environmental conditions directly relate back to my coffee and other junk food consumption? So I think all it takes is that spark of a good idea.
Yeah, and the potential is really unlimited. And there's certainly, again, if you have a network like the National Narrowband Network that takes out that key communications component, then all you need is the devices, and you develop the software to process them, which you can run in the cloud at very low cost. And then you have an app on a tablet that allows someone to use that and get the information from those sensors. So you don't need a huge upfront investment. You just need the creativity and to develop some software, essentially. The more you roll out, the more devices you have to buy. But to get the thing rolling, you don't have to make a huge investment. Thanks in part to cloud. It's creativity, really.
I agree completely. I think my total cost to date is $100 to make this sensor and have the Azure cloud ready to go.
Right.
So, Stuart, what are you doing in this space?
Well, a few months ago, Chris, I thought that this is a space that's really going to take off. And in terms of sort of coverage from a news point of view in Australia, nobody's really looking at it. It's really going below the radar. So I simply started a website, iotaustralia.org.au, in which I started putting news items, opinion posts, blogs about IoT, specifically trying to get stuff there about what was happening in Australia, which there wasn't a lot at the beginning, but it's certainly gathering momentum rapidly. I think in the week after I launched it, Cisco announced they were going to invest $50 million in 2 IT innovation centres in Australia. Communications Alliance, which is the industry body that develops codes and standards for the comms industry, announced the formation of an IoT think tank. So I thought, this is something very timely, and the momentum is starting to gather. The AIIA, the Australian Information Industry Association, held a one-day IoT seminar in Canberra, I think to kind of alert government to it and try and stimulate some government involvement. So things are really starting to happen. And I think it was very timely, and I'm just hoping that it'll become a forum that's totally independent, where for news and views on IoT. So if anybody's got anything to say about IoT, they want to make a comment, or they've got any news about IoT, then please get in touch with me.
So I want to thank you, Stuart, but what is the best way to get in contact with you?
My email address is corner.stuart, corner.stuart@gmail.com, or they can communicate via the website, www.iotaustralia.org.au.
Well, I hope everyone gets in contact with you with some great articles for your site.
Thanks, Chris.
So I hope everyone's learned heaps. Now, don't forget, we have a webinar on IoT at devsuperpowers.com. And if you want more great content like today's interview, don't forget to subscribe to SSW TV. See you, Stuart.
See you, Chris. Bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Did you get all that? We'll take the SSW TV quiz and test your knowledge now.